Hello. I hope you can hear me. This is Steve Lookner, special late night live stream here. Hopefully I've set this up all right. Feel free in the chat to say whether you can hear me or not. But I am coming to you from my apartment, my studio away from the studio. And I'm going to wait and see. Someone, could you confirm that you're hearing me and seeing me okay? That would be lovely. I'm looking in the chat room right now to see. I see Blake says hi, so I assume people can hear me and see me. Great, fantastic, wonderful. Well, good to see you all, or talk to you all and talk with you all. So I wanted to come on tonight and do a stream about this this ruling that came out today. And hello, I see everybody saying hi. Hello, all you people who are saying hi. When I say goodbye, I'll say goodbye to you by name. But thank you for joining. So wanted to do a stream on this ruling today, this judge's ruling, which a lot of you obviously have heard about. And it's a ruling which put on hold part of President Trump's executive order on sanctuary cities. And when this ruling come out, so just to put my cards on the table a little bit, I certainly, so remember the ruling. If you remember, there was the ruling that put the travel ban on hold. That ruling, both of those, there were two different rulings that put the travel ban on hold. Personally, I think those were bad rulings. So I have no problem saying of a federal judge's ruling put an executive order on hold. I have no problem saying that's a bad ruling. The judges, that's bad law. But I started reading today about this ruling, and I first thought when I saw the ruling and it was a judge in San Francisco, I was like, uh-oh, here we go again, another, bad ruling that's going to put one of President Trump's executive orders on hold. But I started reading the ruling, and it started seeming more and more to me as I was reading it like, I think the problem here was kind of the way the executive order was originally written. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, and I want to get into just a bit of detail, a bit more than you might see in the mainstream media, about what the ruling was and why I think the executive order itself was a bit problematic the way it was written. And I'm going to try to do this with a little bit of technical detail, but not like too much detail. So because this could go on for hours if there was lots of enough to, if we started getting really, really into the nitty-gritty technical detail. So let's talk about this ruling that the judge made today. So this executive order came out on January 25th, okay? And the executive order is about sanctuary cities. The judge today didn't put a halt on the entire executive order. The judge put a halt on one specific part of the executive order, that's Section 9. And that's the part that these two cities, I think it was like Santa Cruz and San Francisco, but or Santa Clara and San Francisco, maybe, they sued in federal court because against this particular section, Section 9 of the executive order, because they said this section of the executive order is unconstitutional. And that's what the ruling ruled on today. And it said, the federal judge said, I'm going to halt enforcement of Section 9 of the executive order because I think there's a very good chance that when the court actually decides on the constitutionality of this section, they'll decide that this section is unconstitutional. Okay, so with that being out of the way, let's focus on what is this section of the executive order that the judge said today was likely unconstitutional. What was this section? Well, this section is Section 9. And the basic idea of Section 9 is it's the section where President Trump said, hey, sanctuary cities, if you keep being sanctuary cities, we're going to cut off federal funds from you. So I'm sure a bunch of you remember this talk that happened from President Trump and Attorney General Sessions of cutting off funding to sanctuary cities. So that was the basic idea of Section 9. It was the section where federal funds were cut off to sanctuary cities. But and I want to quickly, maybe I'll show you quickly and then I'll come back. This is Section 9 here. Let's see if I can do this right. Whee! That's Section 9. That's not all of Section 9. That's Section 9A, but Section 9A is the really important part here. So just the part to focus on in Section 9A, let's just see where it says A there? We have Section 9 and then it says A. So I'm going to read a little bit this important paragraph. In furtherance of this policy, the Attorney General and the Secretary there is the, I believe, Department of Homeland Security. Am I right about that? I'm forgetting. I want to say it's Homeland Security. I might be wrong about this. See, this is the thing is, I'm going to have these details that I thought I remembered before and I can't remember. Anyways, if it's not Homeland Security, it's some other similar position. But let's go with that now. But in their discretion and to the extent consistent with the law, shall ensure that jurisdictions that willfully refuse to comply with 8 U.S. Code 1373 sanctuary jurisdictions are not eligible to receive federal grants except as deemed necessary for law enforcement purposes by the Attorney General or the Secretary. The Secretary has the authority to designate in his discretion and to the extent consistent with the law, a jurisdiction as a sanctuary jurisdiction. The Attorney General should take appropriate enforcement action against the entry that any entity that violates 8 U.S.C. 1373 or which has in effect a statute, policy, or practice that prevents or hinders the enforcement of federal law. Okay, might seem like a lot of words there, but the really key part of this that today's ruling really focuses on is that first part of this Section 9A, where it says jurisdictions, like cities, that willfully refuse to comply with 8 U.S. Law 8/1373 are not eligible to receive federal grants except as deemed necessary for law enforcement purposes by the Attorney General or the Secretary. So that's basically saying, that if there's certain cities that don't do something, which makes them sanctuary cities, they can't get federal grants. Okay, and what is this thing, Law 1373 that we're talking about here? Well, let me show that real quick. I'm getting all the detail out of the way here. So the basic idea of Law 1373, which is being referred to here, is that's a law which says, let me go back to me. Well, hold on a second. Let me see if I can call me up here. Where am I here? No, that's not going to work. Anyways, I'm going to go back to me for a second. All right, so basically what we have so far is that this Section 9A says if cities don't do what this particular law says and therefore they're sanctuary cities, they don't get federal funding, okay? And the law it talks about is this Law 1373 thing. And so the basic idea of that law, 8 U.S. Code 1373, is that cities can't, a municipality, a city, it can't prevent people in the city or any institutions in the city from providing information about people's immigration status to the government. So, for example, a city can't say to its police officers, if you find an illegal immigrant, you're not allowed to tell the federal government about it. So certain cities have these rules where they say, like, don't tell the federal government if you find an illegal immigrant and stuff like that, or don't go out of your way to help the federal government with this information. So the basic idea here is, summing this all up in Section 9, what it's basically saying is, if cities violate this law, this federal law, which says you can't restrict people in the city who work for the city or city entities, you can't restrict them from providing information to the government about people's immigration status. That's like a paraphrase of what the law says. But if cities violate that, Section 9A basically says you don't get federal funds. Okay, so that's the basic idea of this section in the executive order we're talking about. Are we cool so far? Now, hopefully that makes sense so far. This is all going somewhere, believe me. I should have mentioned before, if you have questions, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. I got to open up my Twitter page here. Hold on a second. I had the right side one up. I'm at Lookner on Twitter, so feel free if something is making no sense, you can always reach out to me and say, Steve, what you're saying makes no sense. But hopefully it makes some sense so far, and this is going somewhere. So This is the setup. The setup is that this part of the executive order we're talking about, and the part that the judge said is unconstitutional, is this part where it says the federal government will cut off federal funding to cities if they're sanctuary cities, and by sanctuary cities means something like they prevent people in the city from giving information about illegal immigrants to the government. That's a very brief, rough summary. So you might say, what's the problem here? Well, there's different ways, a couple different ways you can read what this section says. One way of reading what this section says is this executive order says, is you could say what this section means is that if a city is a sanctuary city, they get no federal funding for anything. This is the wide interpretation of this section. The wide interpretation is, if you read that section, this section right here. Well, let me get it up here. That's the start of the section right here. The wide interpretation of this section right here. I wonder if I can can I get myself up here? I want to get myself like in a corner here. Let me see if I can try to do this. Where am I? Hold on a second. Oh, I know what the problem is. Let me move this up for a second. Hold on, folks. I'm going to try something here. Hold on. Let's see. Can I fix this? Oh, I did it. I'm kind of small. There I am. Okay, so we're talking about this section here, this section 9A. And what I was saying is one way you could interpret this section is to say, if a city is a sanctuary city, they get no federal money for anything. For their schools, for their roads. What else would a city get money for? For their environmental projects, like anything, and they get no federal money. Now, that would be problematic. That would be unconstitutional. And here's for a number of reasons. But one reason that would be unconstitutional is that that if the president could all of a sudden say, hey, this city gets no federal money for anything, even federal money that has nothing to do with immigration, that would violate part of the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, I believe it is, where it says Congress is the one who gets to decide how the federal government spends its money. Congress has control over federal spending. So if the president could unilaterally, without Congress, just cut off all of the funding to a city, that would mean that the president had control over spending and not Congress. So that's one basic reason why, if this executive order said the president can cut off all funding, all of it, all federal funding to a given city, that would be unconstitutional. And there are a number of other reasons that would be unconstitutional if that's what the rule said. I won't go into them all now, but it's a no-brainer that if this rule, this executive order, means that sanctuary cities, that the president can cut off, the Attorney General, on behest of the president, can cut off all federal money to a sanctuary city, it's a pretty obvious constitutional law case that's unconstitutional. And most of what you hear on TV today when people discussing this as to why this is unconstitutional, they're talking about it's unconstitutional if you interpret it this way. And a bunch of the a bunch of the judge's ruling explains why this executive order is unconstitutional if you interpret it this way. But I think now, so here's the thing though, you don't have to interpret the executive order that way. If you interpret the executive order that way, it is obviously unconstitutional. But the thing is, when the government was arguing to this judge, when the federal government, Trump administration, the Department of Justice, they argued about this executive order in front of the federal judge who made this decision today, and they said, well, that's not the way you should interpret it. That's not what we meant by this executive order. So the first basic point I want to get out there is this, is that a lot of what I've seen on TV today is like talking heads explaining why this is unconstitutional. And they'll say things like, this executive order, the president took away the spending power of Congress. Now, but the thing is, when they're talking about it, that's not, they're interpreting this executive order a certain way on which it's obviously unconstitutional. And furthermore, the federal government, the Trump administration, told this judge that's not how the executive order should be interpreted. That's not what we meant by it. So I'm not going to spend lots of time like they're doing on TV explaining why, if you interpret the executive order to mean that the federal government, that the president could cut off all federal funding to a sanctuary city, that's unconstitutional. I'm not going to spend a lot of time arguing why that would be unconstitutional, because it's pretty much it's obvious and it's not really interesting, and also that's why that's not like the interesting argument here. And if that's what it's like, if the federal government, if President Trump and the administration wrote the executive order to say that, well, then that was like the dumbest executive order ever, because obviously it's unconstitutional. Now, they said they didn't write it to mean that. They said it meant something different. And here's where it gets a bit more interesting to me. And here's where you get to a bit of the problem, I think, with the executive order. So what what the Trump administration said to the judge before he made the ruling today was this. They said, what we meant in this specific section, this section 9 of the executive order, what we meant is sanctuary cities, if they're going to keep being sanctuary cities, they're going to get some specific federal funds cut off. We're going to cut off specific federal funds. And the specific federal funds are like 3 very specific federal programs. Now, I won't go into the names of those programs and I won't go into the technicalities here. But the government basically said, we didn't, hey judge, we're not idiots. We didn't write this executive order to say we can cut off all federal funds to a sanctuary city. What we said is, if there's a sanctuary city and they keep behaving that way, we can cut off these 3 specific sources of funding to a sanctuary city. And now the judge, in his ruling, actually says there's nothing unconstitutional about that. That's what the judge says. He says, well, if we interpret it that way, there's nothing unconstitutional about it. But so if the executive order is interpreted in the way in which the Trump administration was arguing we should interpret it, the judge himself said it's not unconstitutional. Now, here's the problem, though. If the executive order is interpreted in the way the administration... So you might say, like, Steve, what's the problem here? Hold on, let me take a step back. You might say, Steve, what's the problem? The judge has only said it's unconstitutional on one way of interpreting this executive order, but on the way that it was meant, it's perfectly constitutional. So what's the problem, Steve? Here's the problem. The way that the administration is saying they want the executive order to be interpreted, and the way that the administration is saying, the meaning of the executive order, according to the administration, if you read it that way, the executive order doesn't seem to really do anything, and it seems like really weak and not important. So basically, the administration's lawyers were saying, what this section of the executive order says is, if sanctuary cities keep breaking these 3 laws, then we can cut off these 3 sources of funding to them. But that wouldn't do anything new, because the way those 3 programs they're talking about, the 3 sources of federal funding, which I think is all law enforcement related funding, those 3 sources of funding could already be cut off. It was like written into the rules of those sources of funding. I know according to the rules of those sources of federal funding, the federal government already had the power to cut off the funds if those rules weren't followed. And furthermore, those 3 sources of funding don't add up to that much money, actually. I saw a quote that said it added up maybe to $1 million total, but it's not that much money. So the problem here is, if you read this part of the order the way the Trump administration's lawyers say it should be read, then it seems like the order actually didn't say that much and didn't really bring anything new to the table. And that's a problem. Now, one other thing I want to get out of the way here is, we talked about how there's two different ways you could read this executive order. You could read it as saying, like, this part of the executive order, you could read it as saying, like, the president has the power to cut off all federal funding to a sanctuary city, and the president has the power to cut off this small amount of federal funding to a sanctuary city. Those are the two interpretations. Now, I will say a problem with the way it was specifically written is that it's ambiguous between those two interpretations. And actually, as the judge's ruling points out, there's language in the executive order which seems to suggest that the interpretation should be cut off all that the executive order lets the president cut off all federal funding to a sanctuary city, which would obviously be unconstitutional. So it wasn't written very well. But aside from that, I'm going to forget that for a moment. The basic issue I have here is the federal government argued to this judge, you should interpret this part of the executive order as saying the federal government, if their sanctuary cities, can cut off these three specific small sources of funding to these sanctuary cities that could already have been cut off anyway. Now, if that's what the order says, it's really not doing anything. And where that becomes a problem is this executive order was presented, at least in my memory, from President Trump and Attorney General Sessions and Sean Spicer and everybody and other people in the administration as like doing a lot. Like it was presented as like potentially cutting off a lot of federal funds. So I don't really know what went wrong here. Perhaps it's the case that the executive order was supposed to do more, but it was written in this way that it did less. Remember, this executive order came out right at the beginning of the administration. And if you remember, there were basic problems with the first travel ban that I believe got corrected in the second travel ban, and those basic problems in the first one, the way the first one was written, made it easy for a court to put a halt to it. And I wonder if this executive order, it was written around the same time as the first travel ban, were they just not up to speed in the White House with the carefulness of language they needed in their executive orders. But anyway, I don't think what the judge basically said in his ruling is he said, look, there are two ways to interpret this. On this one interpretation, it's obviously unconstitutional. On this other interpretation, it's perfectly constitutional, but it doesn't do anything. Now, maybe the judge could have just said, okay, federal government, I buy your interpretation, so this is perfectly constitutional. But if on that interpretation, this Section 9 doesn't really do much because it only allows the federal government to cut off like these three very specific small sources of funding to sanctuary cities. And it seems like from what we heard from the administration, they wanted this executive order to do more than that. So there's some problems with the way the executive order was written. It was written ambiguously. Another problem is that the bigger problem that I'm pointing out here is that there's two ways of interpreting it. On one way of interpreting it, it's unconstitutional. And if you interpret it the way the Trump administration argued in court it should be interpreted, it seems to really not do much at all and really to do nothing new. And I don't really know what to make of this. It just seems like flawed in the actual writing of it. So that's my take on it. So again, as I said before, I have no problem saying this federal judge made a bad ruling. And as I said before, I think the ruling on the second travel ban is a terrible ruling. I think it'll get overturned. I think it's bad law. And in general, I think there are reasonable questions that can be asked, like about the whole scenario of a single federal judge being able to overturn an entire law. I mean, I think that's a reasonable debate to have, a single federal judge being able to overturn an executive order that applies to the entire country. I think that's a reasonable debate we can have. But in this specific executive order, I don't really find that much fault in anything the judge really did. I think the big fault here to be found is the way the executive order was crafted, and perhaps it's because it was so early in the administration, again, around the time the first travel ban was crafted, and there were some obvious problems with that, which got fixed up in the second travel ban. So maybe it's just it was the beginning of an administration and that's what happened. But that's my take on it. But I wanted to come on the air and talk about it just because everybody I saw on TV was like talking about this one interpretation of this executive order, this one interpretation on which the executive order said the federal government can cut off all federal funding to a sanctuary city, and that's obviously unconstitutional. And it's like, well, I agree it's obviously unconstitutional, but they were ignoring the fact that the federal government argued that that's not how they wanted it to be interpreted, that the Trump administration told the judge, we don't want it to be interpreted that way. So there's this whole other interpretation which wasn't being talked about in the mainstream media, which I wanted to talk about. So I hope that made some sort of sense what I said. It might have been confusing. I apologize if it was. Okay, by the way, as I've been explaining this, I did see a couple of, I think, donations come in on the chat, and I apologize because, now maybe I'm wrong, I thought I saw a couple, but if they did come in, maybe one of you out there in the chat room or the moderators can either post it in the chat room or email me, because I'd like to thank the people who donated. But I was explaining this and I didn't get a chance to thank the people. So I'm looking at the chat room right now, and maybe I'll see some names of people. So hold on a second. Also, I'd like to address any questions or comments you might have. If you disagree with me, that's totally fine. So let's see if I'm just waiting on seeing people posting maybe names of people who donated, if there were any people. I could have swore a second ago I saw like a $1 donation, so I want to give a shout out to that person. But if you'd like to donate, by the way, you probably all know this, but you can click on the $ in the chat room, or you can go to rsbn.tv/donate, and that money, you keep us on the air. So thank you. Without your support, we couldn't stay on the air. Couldn't go cover the Trump rally like we're going to go cover this weekend. So much appreciated for all your support. So I haven't gotten any names from people who gave the donations. So somebody maybe will do it eventually. Let me check also on Twitter here and make sure I'm not ignoring anybody's messages that you might have sent me. Let's see. I'm peeking. I think I'm all caught up on messages. All right, so basically that's the. I think I'll go back to me now. All right, so that's the basic deal. That's my take on this executive order, on the problem with it, and why I think the problem here is not really the judge's ruling. The problem was the way the executive order was originally written. Now, so that's the end of what I have to say on my end, but I would love, if you have any comments or questions, before we go off the air, take your comments and questions. So feel free to write me on Twitter at Lookner, or email me at steve.lookner@rsbn.tv, or I'll also check the chat. Guinevere says, maybe Steve sees a different chat than we do. Wait, Francis Purcell 20 donated. Heart of Dixie says that. Francis Purcell 20 donated? Francis Purcell 20. So thank you, Francis Purcell 20. That's very nice of you. Thank you. That was the donation I missed. Thank you. Very nice. Thanks everybody for filling me in. Sorry, I turned my eyes away from the chat for a second. Let's see. Oh, and JC actually sent me a photo of the donation, so I appreciate that. Thank you. See, I did see it. Let's see. And I'm looking here. Sorry. I got to call up my email. I just want to make sure no one emailed. All right, caught up on email. I think I'm caught up on Twitter. Another thing, can I say, by the way, that bothers me, when these legal rulings happen, a lot of times in the mainstream media, they're presented as like rulings about some larger issue and not about some legal issue. So I saw some people today talking on air about like how this shows that like it's wrong to punish sanctuary cities. And it's like, it doesn't show anything of the sort. It makes no larger point about sanctuary cities. If you read the ruling, it's all very technical, narrow legal issues. That's what the ruling is on. So, Care to See just donated $2. Thank you, Care to See, very much. That's very kind of you. Really, really appreciate it. all of us here at Rise Out appreciate it. So thank you so much. Very nice of you. So, and you know, it also bothers me. Oh, and also Carl Peterson, $5 for the Trump rally road trip, corn nuts, burnt peanuts, and jujubes. Do we have to buy those three things, Carl, or can we buy other things? That's a good question. I don't know. But thank you, Carl, and thank you, Care to See, so much. Much appreciated. We will be we'll be driving to Pennsylvania starting on Thursday, actually. We're going to drive Thursday and get there late Friday. That's our plan, at least. And we'll really look forward to covering that for you. And I also want to mention, though, on my point about the way the media talks about like legal rulings. Also, when like the media, like when the Senate has their hearings on judges, they act as if the judges are just strictly ruling on like political view on political matters and not on legal rulings. They'll ask judges like, what do you think about, you know, abortion, or what do you think about, will you rule against abortion, or will you overturn Roe versus Wade? And it's like, these are specific, they're not going to get a case that says like, do you approve of Roe versus Wade? There'll be some specific legal issue that's brought to them, and they'll have to decide on that specific legal issue. Now, maybe you think their politics sometimes gets in the way or sometimes influences them. Fine. I'm just saying, though, I get frustrated that like these legal decisions, the legal stuff is often like totally left out of discussion in the mainstream media about them. So I think it's good to focus on the legal issues at hand, because that's what the decision is actually about. All right, so I'm going to check here on Twitter. I'm going to stay on for a few minutes longer, and then I'm going to get off the air. Thank you for the moderators for moderating the chat, by the way. I much appreciated. And thank you, everybody who's been in the chat room chatting and watching. I'm going to peek and see. All right, if you have any more questions or comments, get them in now, because I need to go soon, because it's getting late. And I need to get up for work tomorrow. And I know you've been making comments in the chat room. I've actually been looking on Twitter and stuff. So now everybody's talking about corn nuts. Okay, so I think I'm gonna wrap. I'm gonna give it like another minute, and then I'll wrap it up. Well, Another Rose gave $10. Thank you so much, Another Rose. That's really kind of you. That's really sweet. Very nice. Thank you. And Retro Rob gave $5 and said, is Jeff Sessions legally vetting these executive orders as AG? Seems everything big we try to gets shut down. So, Retro Rob, I think that's a good point. I think this executive order and that travel ban, the first one, they came out around the same time, and they really seem to not be vetted that well, honestly. Now, there's a million reasons that could be, but something was going a little awry there at the time. Now, it was right at the beginning. President Trump had just come into office, so maybe they just should have waited a little longer. But I do think, there were problems with this. But, again, I think people forget that this executive order wasn't put out last week. It was put out in January, right at the beginning of the administration. So hopefully any of these initial problems with vetting the executive orders and getting them, correct, or getting them better stated so they wouldn't be overturned are and not ambiguous like this one was. Hopefully those issues have by now been dealt with. I hope. Let's see. Yeah, and what else was I going to say? I was going to talk a little bit about the rally. The rally, I think the rally, by the way, I want to say it's at 7:30 on 7:30 on Saturday. So hopefully we'll get out there, even in the morning or around noontime, and just be interviewing people who are in line for it. So we will get there out as early as we can and bring stuff to you. So be sure to check out our coverage on Saturday. All right. It looks like I think we're all done with the questions. So I'm going to start saying my goodbyes now. I appreciate you all tuning in for this very legalese kind of discussion. I want to thank all the moderators, JC, Guinevere, Heart of Dixie. Who else was moderating? I mean, all of you in general, but I saw some specifics during this broadcast. And all the people out there who watched. I'll say goodnight to some of you as I am about to get off. We have Miss Tree and Sean Lankus and Tia Marie and Arnold Matrix and Goldie and Zane and Eon Mars, Another Rose. Who else is out there? Jacqueline O, Tommy Versetti, Dixie, Barney, Webster, Orfideos, Jason Thornton. Jason, you're not going to be at the. Are you going to be at the rally, Jason, holding the sign? I'm hoping you are, but I'm guessing you might not be. Francis Purcell, thank you again for those of you like Francis who donated, much appreciated. Who else do we got out here? Alan Reiser, thanks. Alan Reiser says you are watching mainstream media. I don't think this is mainstream media. Son of Earth and Dusky. I always read Son of Earth and Dusky like Jerry Sandusky, but it's Son of Earth and Sky. Care to See, thanks for your donation. Retro Rob, thank you for your donation. GM, have a good night. Linda Luke, woohoo, loved you guys, great job. Thank you, Linda, so much for your donation right at the end. Really appreciate it. That's really kind of you. Thank you, Linda Luke. Love it. Adoptable Joshi, have a good night. And all the mods. That's very nice of you, Linda. And who else we got out there? I think I got one message here. Let me see. I got a message that I'm going to read, I think, about this. Erin wrote in, E-R-E-N, all Trump has to do is make hunting illegals and Muslims legal, just don't investigate them. Cities post name and locations and let the citizens handle it. Well, I don't know about that suggestion, Erin. I mean, normally anything... I'm not someone who wants to encourage violence against people, but if by hunting you mean like, allowing citizens to do a citizen's arrest and bring them in, there might be constitutional issues there. I don't know, but I'm going to hope that you didn't mean violence against people. But look, that's your opinion, so you're welcome to say it. But I will say that I don't think a solution is having violence against people. I will say this though, one thing that President Trump could do is. Hold on a second. Carl Peterson says $10. Carl just donated $10 and he said persistence beats resistance every time. Carl Peterson, thank you again for a donation, Carl. I know you donated a little bit before too. So 2 donations, Carl. That's really nice of you. Thank you. We will put it toward. We'll probably go toward our President Trump trip to cover him, but. There is a law that we talked about before on the books that says that cities can't prevent people who work for the city from giving information about illegal immigrants to the federal government. So if President Trump wanted to, he could start enforcing that, but that becomes a huge deal. Like the government doesn't want to go in. I don't think Trump wants to send people into like San Francisco and start arresting their government officials. But at a certain point, if the law is on the books, that's sort of the last resort of enforcing it. If there are laws on the books against sanctuary city actions, so the law's there, the federal government can enforce it. It'd be a big constitutional crisis, but they could enforce it. So, but the law is there. Okay, anybody else I want to say goodbye to? Rocky Mike, I don't think I saw you before. Kathy Granger, who says ban sanctuary cities. Ket King, who is singing Lady Gaga. Jason, thank you for the nice words. Jason, you might have said in the chat whether you're going to be at the rally, but I missed it. Okay, all right. I'm now for real. I'm going to sign off so I can. I'm actually going to go. I was going to go to the gym earlier. I'm going to go later because it keeps me refreshed. Actually, going to the gym, even though it's late at night. So I'll go now and then I'll go to bed. So I'm gonna get going so I don't go to bed too late tonight and can be up bright and early tomorrow for work. But thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for joining Right Side Broadcasting tonight. Very much appreciate it. Thanks for all your donations. That was really kind of you. Thanks on behalf of everybody at Right Side. And thank you to all the moderators. Thank you to all the chatters. Thank you to everybody who watched. And what else? I'm seeing the chat's on a bit of a delay, so I'm just reading what you said. Thank you, Zane. Thank you, Sean. Thanks all of you guys. All right, awesome. I hope you have a great night. I see a bunch of you are going to move into the other chat, so have a great chat there. And thanks for joining me. And we'll do it again soon. If there's a Spicer briefing. Well, I guess by the way, President Trump is supposed to announce his tax planned tomorrow, so maybe we'll be able to carry that announcement. I hope we can. So I'll probably see you at some point tomorrow on the air. But have a great night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Till next time. Now we're going to get this little screen up here. Let's see if I can do this. It's not going to resume in the moment, by the way. It's going to end. Good night, everybody.